Are you stuck in the endless cycle of setting goals and then abandoning them, and you're wondering why you can't just stick to your plan? Well, if so, this video is for you. We're going to dive deep into some goal setting failure modes and how to prevent them. Some of these you will know of, others you won't, because they're not talked about enough. Now, before we dive in, I want to quickly announce that I'm running a 3-day live event called Breakthrough Goals next month. We're going to dive deep into high performance goal setting, how to design goals that work for you and your unique psychology, how to commit to a path even when you're uncertain, and how to structure a 90-day execution roadmap that gets you crystal clear on what needs to be done so that you can get more done in 3 months than most people do in a year. I would love to have you join me. You can click the link below in the description or go to breakthroughgoals.com and I'll see you there. So the first reason why we fail to adhere to goals is that we override the intuitive with the purely rational. Whenever I've set goals that made logical sense, but I didn't really care about them on an intuitive level, it's never worked out. To give you an example, when I had built my business, EDM Pro, to a certain point, I started thinking about what was next. What should I do next with my life? And the logical next step, which many people told me to do, was why don't you just teach people how to build their own online course business? And there was something about that I just didn't care about intuitively. It was I don't really want to do this. It doesn't make sense to me. But I overrided that feeling, right, with the logic and the rationality. And when I tried to pursue that goal, it was really, really hard. Like I would just self-sabotage, I'd procrastinate, I'd make up excuses, I'd get distracted by other shiny objects and so on and so forth. And that's because on some level, I didn't actually want to pursue that goal. When you do this, when you try and override your inner self with some sort of rational framework or pursuit, I don't think it ever really works out. And even if it did work out, the outcome probably wouldn't be that great. It's like the person who thinks I should just become as rich as I can because that'll make me happy. And then it doesn't, right? They've achieved the goal only to find out that it wasn't the right goal. Now, I'm not talking about the intuitive in some woo-woo way. I'm just talking about that right hemisphere of your brain, the deep intuitive part of you, your subconscious that knows more than your rational mind will ever know. If you fail to integrate this part of yourself, then you will often set goals that might sound good in theory, but are extremely hard to adhere to and execute on because ultimately there's a huge part of you who just doesn't care about the pursuit. Now, there's no easy, quick fix solution to this kind of goal failure. It requires a training of yourself to be more aware of that inner voice, right? The intuition. And there's two things that I find come up when you're going down a path that might seem rational, but you don't really care about, and you haven't integrated your intuition and so on and so forth. The first is that you feel an extreme resistance to working on that goal. I'm not talking about the normal resistance that we all face when we're doing work, when we're doing creative work. I'm talking about a sort of dissonant, really uncomfortable feeling. The second thing is that your tendency to self-sabotage goes way up, right? You start finding ways to avoid working on the goal. Maybe it's shiny object syndrome, another form of procrastination, or you just put things in place that stop you from executing. And you only realize in hindsight what you've done and how you've self-sabotaged. But you can train yourself to become more aware of this. It's like just asking yourself that question, why is there so much resistance here? Why don't I want to do the work? Sometimes it's just because you're lazy. Other times it's because you're working on something that you just don't care about and it doesn't make sense. And you've set this goal for yourself based on what you've seen somewhere else on the internet, or based on what someone's told you, like, hey, you should do this. This makes sense. It's like, oh yeah, okay. No, you have to trust yourself a little bit more. You have to go inwards, find that intuition. What do you care about? What is the impulse that you can't really put into words? And then how do you go from there to structuring a more explicit goal? Now, this also leads to another type of goal failure, which is that you set goals when you should instead be exploring and letting things emerge. Something I'm going to talk about at length in the Breakthrough Goals event is this concept of emergence versus architecture. A lot of us think of goal setting as architecture. We start from the top. We have a vision, like a long-term vision. We break it down into maybe a yearly goal, and then we break that down into quarterly goals and so on and so forth. There's a lot of value in doing this. It works, but sometimes it doesn't work. There are times where that architected approach holds you back a lot because you're actually in a position where the leverage and the right path is found through emergence, through exploration, right? From trying a bunch of things in a less goal-oriented state. Doing experiments, saying, I'm going to try this for 30 days. I'm going to explore this area and so on and so on and so forth. When you should be in this state and when the circumstances in your life lend towards that emergence and exploration, for example, maybe you've sold a company or you're taking a sabbatical, you've got all this free time, you're like, I don't know what I should do with this. Well, often if you try and architect a goal and force a goal into that situation, it feels really unnatural and you ultimately sabotage it, right? Because you know you should be exploring on some level. This, again, is a sort of intuitive thing, whether you should be in exploration mode or exploitation mode. My view is that if you have obvious problems in your life that need to be solved that are painful, you should be in architecture mode, trying to solve them really fast. If you're in a position where you have a bit of freedom and you're very uncertain about what the next move is, and there's no extremely strong pressure, then it's not a bad idea to explore and try a bunch of things. Again, this actually comes back to the intuition thing, because intuition and exploration are inextricably linked. When you're in exploration mode, you're trying to find that thing that gives you energy, that you can pursue long-term and really put your heart, soul, and mind into. So the solution to this, if you are someone who tries to architect when you shouldn't, is to actually commit to a period of no goals, which is sort of a goal in itself, but just to experiment, try things, explore, and do so in a guilt-free fashion, right? You might want to have check-in points every 30 days or so to make sure that you're not just endlessly like getting stuck in rabbit holes and so on and so forth, and to ask if you're ready to set a goal, to architect, to exploit what you've found. The third goal setting failure is that you make everything too rigid. We live in a very dynamic world, and while there are certain environments and situations where rigid goal setting and frameworks are effective, more often than not, they make us less effective. And if you don't plan or you don't allow room in your plan for that dynamism, then you can often get thrown off course and you can just give up entirely when your plan doesn't map onto reality, okay? To give you an example, one of my goals at the moment is to work really hard to launch my Breakthrough Goals event that I mentioned at the start of the video. I want as many people to sign up as possible, and I also want to make it an incredibly valuable event, right? So I'm working really hard on the content. And I'm being very rigid about this. This is like a 30-day sprint, and this type of rigidity is useful given the context I'm in. There's a clear goal. I know what I want. I know how to do it. And the execution is really all that matters. And so I don't need that much flexibility. And as we'll look at in the next goal failure, being too vague is actually another mistake. It keeps you away from real action. We'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, I've got this extreme rigidity at the moment, but if I said to myself, I'm going to do this Breakthrough Goals event every month for the next 12 months, well, that would probably be too rigid. It wouldn't give me room for data and feedback to adjust my course. I might launch this event and it might completely flop, right? And then if I was to set this rigid goal of I need to do this every month, then I might get some weird psychological effects. I might be like, oh, this failed, and so you might as well just give up on this whole idea entirely. If I'm too rigid over too long of a time frame, I get narrowed vision and I might shut myself off from good opportunities or potential ways to pivot and do better. So you need some level of rigidity, but you also need to leave room for dynamism. You make things happen, things also happen to you. If you don't have a framework for integrating the dynamic, then you'll simply be less effective. A solution here is when you're thinking of goal setting, especially as the time horizon increases, you should reduce the level of rigidity you have. You should be more open to pivoting to other options and so on and so forth. And then take that long-term flexibility and marry it with short-term rigid cycles and sprints. Here's my year-long goal to achieve this, to make this amount of money. And in the next 30 days, like, here's the exact project I'm going to work on to see if I can get closer to that long-term goal. And it's a bet, right? It's like it may or may not work. I'm pretty sure it's going to, but let's do it and then see how it went, and then we can adjust if we need. So you're benefiting from that flexibility and rigidity, which lends itself to execution at the same time. Another goal failure is that you self-sabotage by keeping goals vague so you don't need to take real action. When you set a goal, like I want to double my business revenue this year, or I want to lose weight this year, or whatever, and that's where you stop, where does that lead you? There's no specificity, right? You haven't thought about how you're going to do it, who you're going to work with, what steps need to be taken, or when they should be done. We all know that we need to break our goals down into sub-goals, projects, actions, right? Tasks, deadlines. But we often avoid doing this because it brings us closer to the often uncomfortable actions that need to be taken. And so it's been a common tendency of mine to keep my goals in this sort of neat little like bubble over here, keep them a little bit vague, not intentionally. Again, this is a form of self-sabotage. Just keep them there. They're always, I'll come back to them, but never break them down and bring them to the ground so that I can execute on them. If we can keep our goals vague and detached from on the ground action and execution, then we can remain in the comfort zone longer and pretend to be working on the goal. We can plan, think, brainstorm, work on the peripheral actions. And there's a psychological comfort in this ambiguity. So what do we do about this? Well, we need to get specific. We really need to break our goals down into specific actions. A common objection to this is, well, I don't know what the specific actions are. Okay, well, that's your first specific action, is to like figure out what those actions are. Oh, you want to lose weight? Oh, what's the best way to do that? Start doing some research, talk to someone, figure it out, follow the plan, right? Get yourself closer to the action. I want to double my business revenue. I don't know how to do that. Well, brainstorm all the ways and then just choose the one that you think is highest leverage. So get clear, get specific. What are the precise next actions that need to be taken? What are the real world systems that I need to execute on? Often you know what these are. You just don't want to define them and make them explicit because that means you'll be confronted with having to do them. Worth mentioning that something we do in this live Breakthrough Goals event on day 2 and 3 is get extremely specific and clear on the actions that we need to take over the next 90 days as we put together our execution roadmap, which is unique to you and I. Okay, next goal setting failure is that you fail to find and stay in the optimal zone of challenge. This is something I talked about in the high motivation stack, right? We were talking about competence and mastery and this, where the flow state exists in this optimal zone of challenge. It also applies to goal setting. If you set your goals too easy, then they won't motivate you. And if you set your goals too hard, then you'll find reasons to quit and work on something else. The best way to explain this is with a video game analogy. So imagine you're playing a video game. Let's say it's an open world RPG, right? And it involves a bunch of different areas and territories. And if you go into one of these areas that has monsters or whatever that are much higher level than you, and you're not prepared, you don't have the skills or the equipment, you're going to get killed, right? It's too hard. And you'll know this if you've played these kind of games. You go in there, you get one-shotted, and then you're like, I need to go back. I need to grind a bit more. Maybe I'll go over to this area that's like a few levels above me. It's hard, it's challenging, but I can manage, right? Likewise, if you go back to the easy area, the tutorial spot where you started, after you've been playing for, a couple of weeks or whatever, it's super boring. at first it's fun because it's like, I can just like kill these enemies real easy. But at some point you're like, hey, there's no challenge in this. It's not that enjoyable. And so what do you end up doing? You end up finding this optimal zone of challenge. You go to the area that is challenging. It's hard. There's risk, there's threat, but you also feel confident that you can make it through, right? You can complete that level or clear that area or whatever. And then you can move on to the harder ones. So you want to find this optimal zone of challenge when you set goals. You don't want to set them far too high, but you also don't want to set them far too low. In my observation and experience, most people and the clients I work with, they set their goals too low. So I do think there's a tendency to aim too easy. And that's also a reason why motivation in people is lowered. But one frame that's useful is to just think about like, what is the next level up? Or what is the next 2 to 3 levels up? Not what is level 10 if you're at level 1, but what does level 3 look like? What does level 4 look like? And how can I operate there? The next goal failure is that you view your goals as nice to achieve instead of real commitments. Something I've said before on the channel, which is a quote from Venkatesh Rao, is that most failures are commitment failures. Most things work if you stick to them. The problem is it's hard to stick to the thing, right? Especially over the long term. It's even harder to stick to the thing if you just frame the thing as a goal rather than a commitment. Language matters, especially the language you use with yourself. And we all know, like we've all had the experience of setting goals and then abandoning them, right? And so I think on some deep psychological level, when we set a goal for ourselves, especially in the new year, we kind of know like, there's a chance I don't achieve this. Whereas when you frame it as a commitment, when you say, this is what I'm going to do, this is the controllable input that I need to focus on, it's a lot different, right? It's like, I am doing this and it will not fail. To do that, you do need that controllable input component to a goal. It can't be, I'm going to double my business revenue. You know, it can't be, I'm committed to making $1 million over the next few years, because you can't commit to that. Like there's no obvious thing to commit to, but you can commit to, I'm going to make 100 videos on YouTube, or I'm going to make 1,000 cold calls. That is something you can commit to. It's completely inside of your control. And when you don't make a clear commitment, you exist in this world of optionality. Optionality is not motivating. It's just options. In fact, it undermines intrinsic motivation because your focus gets dissipated. You think of all the things you could do. And so if you want to get more motivated, you want to adhere to your goals, then you must frame them as commitments. Final goal failure for this video is that you don't get quick wins to build momentum. So going back to my example of the Breakthrough Goals event, as I'm working on this, I wanted to get the landing page up as soon as I could, because I knew as soon as it was up, it would not only feel like a win, right? But it would also add some pressure. I'd be in the game, so to speak now. There was no backing out, right? This thing is happening. People are signing up. I have to put in the work. A lot of people will set a goal like this. And in the past, you know, I would have had this idea. I want to do this live event. And then I would start working on all the stuff around that, like all the planning. Maybe I'd start working on the content and so on and so on. I'd leave the quick wins part, the thing that would actually build momentum and add some pressure. I'd like delay that for as long as possible because it was uncomfortable. And this is what leads to goal abandonment. If you don't get that quick win early enough, it's very hard to feel momentum. People will set goals and they'll work on things that don't elicit that feeling of momentum, that don't feel like wins. And then they'll find another shiny object, or they'll abandon the pursuit entirely. The person who sets the goal of losing weight and spends all their time looking at the best methods, routines, gear, none of which contributes to this feeling of like quick win, instead of hyper focusing on losing those first few pounds or signing up to the gym and doing their first workout, which would contribute to momentum. The guy who wants to build a business as a side project outside of his 9 to 5, and he spends all his time reading these business books instead of hyper focusing on trying to make his first dollar, which would ignite further action, commitment, and motivation. So you want to structure your goals in a way where you build momentum fast. This means identifying what actually matters and what will move the needle forward. Sometimes it means lowering the stakes initially so you can actually get that success, get that positive outcome. And usually it's something that feels a bit uncomfortable, but once you've done it, the momentum and motivation you gain from it is very powerful. So that is it for this video. Just to recap, we looked at a bunch of goal failure modes or goal failure types. The first was that you override the intuitive with the purely rational. You fail to integrate that subconscious part of you that sort of knows what it wants. You override that. The second is that you set goals when you should instead be in exploration mode, letting things emerge. You try and architect your way through everything, even in situations where you shouldn't. Third, you make things too rigid. You fail to account for the dynamism that exists in life and business and your career. Fourth, you self-sabotage by keeping goals vague so that you don't need to take real action. You fail to identify what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and get really specific on the actions that need to be taken. Fifth, you fail to find the optimal zone of challenge. You set your goals way too hard so that you can find excuses for why you fail to abandon them, or you set them too easy and then you just don't feel any motivation at all. Six, you view your goals as nice to achieve instead of commitments. The way you frame your goals, you don't use the language of commitment. They're kind of optional. You're not sure if you'll achieve them or not. And then finally, you don't get quick wins to build momentum. You don't structure your goals in a way where you work on the important actions first that will actually build momentum and motivation. Now, if you want to dive deeper into goal setting, you want to design better goals for yourself, you want to adhere to them, execute like a maniac, then make sure to join the Breakthrough Goals event. Click the link below or go to breakthroughgoals.com and you can sign up. It is next month, April 8th to 10th. I would love to see you there. Thanks for watching. See you next time.